When you are playing a game, how do you know where to go? Where are you supposed to take your character in order to progress? There's usually an icon on the screen pointing you where you should go. Today we're going to be talking about one of the most fundamental elements in a game, something that can determine whether a game feels boring, monotonous, memorable, or whether it becomes incredible, amazing, unforgettable. We are talking about how games deal with direction, the place you're supposed to go. It seems like a simple thing, but you notice throughout the video, this can completely shape your interest in the game. Location and direction in video games were never really a problem, at least not in older games, showing the player where to go. If you think about oldest games like shoot 'em ups, the direction was handled by the game itself. If you think about old games, either the game automatically moves you in one direction or you define your direction like Pac-Man. Actually, in most old games, you stayed on a single screen and there was some shiny item attracting your character, which made things pretty obvious. When side-scrolling games came along, most of them moved the character automatically. You didn't really control the direction yourself. When Super Mario Bros. Came out, something changed. Now you could control when to move forward or not. The way the game told you that you are supposed to only move forward was simple. The game didn't let you go backwards. If you tried to return in a level, you just couldn't. So you immediately understood that the only option was to move ahead. Is that the reason why you can go back in the first Super Mario? Maybe, especially when you consider that it was the beginning of 2D platform. I'm talking about this because this is just one of the design tricks to guide the player in one direction. The coins, for example, are often placed strategically to guide the player, to show you where you can go. How could you know that you would be falling off the clouds if there's a gap there? Because every gap in Super Mario kills you. The coins are there to tell you that it's safe to go there. It's a psychological trick and it works. When games moved into 3D, the famous corridor games appeared, games where you advance in one direction simply because it's the only possible path. You can't go anywhere else. If you try, you just bump into an invisible wall, falling into a pit, or reach a fork where one path has an item and the other lets you progress. So there's basically two directions, the one you came from and the one that's in front of your character. And there's also those classic moments when the game gives you two possible paths and you move forward hoping it's not the actual main path, hoping it's the optional one, so you can obviously check the secret the developer hid from you. This obviously excludes games with more exploration or games where you need to collect the items to clear a stage, because in those you don't really have a single direction. It's basically a small open world. Things got more complicated when games started offering multiple possible directions, like semi-open world games or roguelikes, which require a lot of exploration to figure out the correct path. Directions in games became a real dilemma in open world titles because it's much harder to communicate with the player intuition without making the experience boring or tedious. Making the players understand where they need to go is something that can easily fail, leaving them lost with no idea what to do. And I'm talking about the solution most games found was simply adding direction markers. In general, most games do something very simple. They place a marker on the radar and tell you to go there, and once you arrive you'll find the character or item you need to progress in the game. Go to this point and there you'll find a bunch of enemies to defeat, a cutscene that advances the story or a puzzle for you to solve, and then the games move forward. And how this was done over the years is very interesting. GPS in games is a very curious case. For some reason, games standardized GPS in such a way that it feels like there's no other method to tell the player which path to follow. But actually, GPS is a modern thing in video game, and there was a time when it didn't exist at all. What's interesting is that before GPS became standard, it's funny to see how games attempted, each in their own way, to discover the best method to show the player the route. The classic GTA games, for example, would you simply place a dot on the map and where you needed to go, and that was it. You had to figure out the route on your own through the streets. This forced the player to learn the map in a deeper way. There's even some debate about whether the lack of GPS should be seen more as a game design decision than just a lack of quality of life feature. Need for Speed Underground 2 is a very interesting case. When you mark a point on the map, the game would place a giant 3D arrow above your car, telling you where to go, instead of showing the exact location on the radar. And even though I feel that this is kinda outdated today, it's interesting because it's different. When I revisited Need for Speed a few months ago, even though I thought this way of pointing the direction felt old, I actually found it really cool to play with another method, a method that isn't the standard of the industry, you know? Sometimes the arrow fails, but it's still a different way to show the path to the player. I think it's a bit of fun, you know? And that's interesting because the most efficient method to show the player the way is the GPS, marking the route precisely. But here's the fun thing. Playing video games shouldn't be always about efficiency. Variation matters. Maybe relying on GPS systems in every single game prevents developers from thinking of other creative ways to guide the player. That's why The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time is a game that went completely against the industry by the time it was released. The game simply does not have a direction marker. It uses the story and visual cues to guide you instead, which makes Ocarina of Time harder than average. Because if you lose the track of the story, you also have no idea where to go. You have to explore a lot to understand where it needs to be done. Leaving the player lost can be complicated, and this is a real challenge for developers. But what's cool is that some games embrace this, like Dark Souls. Dark Souls don't tell you the path. It spread the items you need throughout the world, and you should search for them, memorizing the route, understanding how everything works. Being lost is part of the gameplay, but the truth is, even there the game's design still guides the player in certain ways, a bit like Ocarina of Time did back in the Nintendo 64 era. And in a way, it also inspired Breath of the Wild, which expanded the idea of exploration, where you decide the sequence and how you want to do things. But despite that, it's important to remember that Ubisoft Games has also experimented with using environmental cues to guide the players, like in the first Assassin's Creed, where you follow clues to find the access, or even in Ghost Recon Wildlands, which before Zelda was already a game where you could play the campaign in any way you wanted. Also, even though Ubisoft gets criticized a lot, they innovated back then. I even say that they revolutionized many elements of the game design, in the past of course. This whole idea was expanded into Elden Ring as well. You leave the game first dungeon and you are immediately facing a giant castle. You know you have to go there, even though the game gives you no hint, no marker, nothing telling you to go in that direction. Something about the castle grabs your attention, so you understand that's your goal. But you also realize you need to explore first to get strong enough to defeat the boss waiting there. All of this without the game saying a single word or placing a single direction marker in the map. A game that made player direction really interesting was Ghost of Tsushima. I imagine you remember. The game used the wind to guide the player. Whenever you needed to go to a mission, the game used the direction of the wind to show you where to go. All you had to do was to follow the wind, watch the trees and the vegetation, and you would be going the right way. I personally think this is very creative and a great alternative to the usual methods the game used to guide players. And that's the point. It's a way of using visual cues to guide the players instead of showing text telling you where to go. Many games use similar items. They light up an area and you immediately know that that's where you need to be, or the color of a light's different, or something in the environment catches your attention and you understand that's your destination. There's also games that turn the path itself into the challenge, integrating direction to the gameplay, something that we don't see often anymore, like Shadow of the Colossus. What I find more interesting about Shadow of the Colossus is the lack of obvious markers, but the truth is the markers is hidden inside the gameplay mechanic. Think about how much less interesting the game would be if the marker looked like this. That's why I'm a huge supporter of visual cues over literal direction markers. The game design is built so that the player has to figure out where to go in their own, using elements from the world itself. The environment tells you the direction. It's also worth mentioning Death Stranding, where the game borrows many ideas from Shadow of the Colossus, especially the concept that the path itself is the challenge. You have a destination, yeah, but the whole journey is the core of the gameplay. Another way modern games guide the players, of course, through the compass at the top of the screen, something used in a ton of games, especially shooters. They abandoned the idea of a GPS and instead they placed a compass with a direction marker. In conclusion, I think it's very interesting to analyze some aspects of games that you usually don't pay attention to, and to see how games handle certain mechanics. As I said in the video, it's important for games to consider new ways to guide the player through gameplay in order to make the experience more fun, more engaging, more interesting. The most efficient method is not always the most enjoyable, especially when you are talking about video games. And that's all guys, I hope you liked the video. If you watched the video till the end, please consider leaving a like, and that's all guys, and bye!